Hey everyone, we're back with the second episode of The Edge with Bhagyashree and Nisha, who's my co-host. The very first session was pretty interesting where Bhagya helped us understand the nuance between remote working, work from anywhere, and work from home, which are terms, again, let's all admit it, we've all used very interchangeably the last year or so. In this episode, we're going to be exploring what are some of the playbooks that we can sort of adopt in the modern day world of, the transition that we're going through, right, between COVID and the post-COVID world, right? And so Bhag is going to help us structure that and make that into very bite-sized content that I think all of us can really start, implementing after we're done with this. Nisha, I'll let you lead this time. Please start.
Sure. Thank you, Varun and
Yeah, yeah.
Bhagyashree. Thank you so much for staying with us and for your time.
My
Thanks.
pleasure.
So, Bhagyashree, we've been speaking about this for some time now, right? If you can, it would be really interesting to have our audience listen in on some of the cases, which have been, let's say interesting also, but equally new to you during the pandemic, which were pertaining to remote work, which were pertaining to work from home and stuff that you learned a lot during the
Right,
pandemic, and you will take after, you will remember this period, even later.
right.
If you could, I know we're kind of digging a little bit over here, but if you can reveal what you can reveal, it'll be fun to
Yeah.
hear.
It'll also be helpful if you could run us through a couple of edge cases as well. So I think our listeners can sort of get the best of both worlds, the
Yes.
1% possibility as well as the 99% that is sort of expected to happen as well.
Sure. So first, I want to say that CHROs need to know that what happened and what we are all going through is not remote work. It's just a knee-jerk reaction to a pandemic where systems and people were just forced to adapt. And I think everybody has pretty much adapted well. But going forward, if they are looking to roll out hybrid work policies for their teams, it needs to be a more strategic and a sustainable, well thought approach. So last year, I in cases that I teamed up on. So I'm licensed to practice in the UK and Wales, but there were a couple of cases that I worked on, just guiding other lawyers. So let me first begin with something that I learned last year was this Australian case. And this is a landmark judgment that came up and was widely recognized and acceptable. And going forward, CHROs need to be very, very concerned about workplace injuries and how that becomes a liability of an employer. So in Australia, a woman was working from her home office and she was going down the stairs to attend a Zoom call from her manager, and her husband stabbed her to death and she died there. I mean, I know it's a very, very horrific, and perhaps one of the very extreme cases. But this is very important because we all know that in during the pandemic, as people were just stifled to work from home, cases of domestic abuse and violence shot up globally by 121%. And now going forward, if any company wants their employee to work from home, they need to also assess their domestic abuse or domestic violence situation, as opposed to, sorry, along with ergonomic and workplace assessment. So now going back to the case that I was talking about, her children knocked the doors of the court and asked for workers' compensation, and the company denied, saying that your mother was working from her home, so it essentially doesn't translate into a workplace injury. The Australian Supreme Court ruled out that it was a workplace injury because this happened when she was working from her basement office. She was going to pick up an office call. So that translated into workplace injury, and the children were granted compensation under Workmen's Compensation Act, New South Wales. So this was just one of cases. I know because I was a part of it, but there have been a number of cases last year where workplace injuries happened. A lot of people that were working from home, they had some or the other kind of physical ailment. Some of them also they were suffering from previous medical conditions like gout or arthritis, and it just aggravated because they were working from workstations that was not fit, ergonomically fit, or they were just working from kitchen tables or sofas or anything. This would be a pain point if that is not addressed before a policy to turn to hybrid is considered. The second case that I was not a part of but was again very interesting was a Zurich court judgment. And in that judgment, the court ruled out that if an employee is working from home, the company needs to pitch in a part of utilities. And that essentially meant that if an employee is working from home, the company needs to pay for a part of their rent, part of their electricity, internet, water bills, or any other expense that they would incur while discharging their duty. In summer,
Bhagya,
and
sorry to interject
sorry,
here. How is that
yes.
different in the earlier the first podcast the first edition that we did together? How is that different from the kind of perks that the company offers specifically for remote workers compared to this? What is the nuance there?
So if the perks that companies offer would be, companies have kind of restricted themselves from to just offer some kind of piece of furniture or hardware, and some maybe some sort of cybersecurity softwares or
Right.
anti-malware, anti-spyware softwares. But here, the Swiss court ruled out that your duty of care doesn't only stop at providing the right workstation. It also extends into pitching in a part of the utilities bill because somebody was using internet for your work. Somebody was, using electricity for your work. They created a home office out of their home that was essentially an office in all terms. So the company needs to pitch in. It's kind of a calculation that teams would have to do as to, what is the size or how much square feet a person requires to work from home, in an OSHA compliant manner. So there's a whole lot of calculation that teams would have to do. But this is something that team CHROs would also now have to do before they allow people to work from home. And the third interesting case that I worked on was misclassification. And this is very common in remote teams. All these remote teams, most of them, I wouldn't say all, but most of them are hiring people as independent contractors, but making them work as employees. And sometimes they also offer them equity. The problem with offering equity to independent contractors is something that would come and haunt them later on, because technically you shouldn't be giving part of your equity to people who are just independent contractors. But more than that, their main worry would be the fact that they are misclassifying. So the Californian Supreme Court, in one of the judgments in, I think, 2019, rolled out ABC test. And in several cases, ABC test was widely adopted by other courts in the world and also in India. So in India, on two instances, the court adopted ABC test as given by the Californian Supreme Court and said that a certain individual, if they check all the boxes that the test has rolled out, then that means that that person is an employee and not a contractor. And if any company is misclassifying on the basis of that, not only that company would have to pay fines and pay the amount that is left to the employee, but their registration as a corporation could also be cancelled. So before ruling out any type of policy, CHROs, I really request you to take care of this, sit with your legal counsel and work out what kind of situations, employment status, policies, and perks you would be rolling out to your employees.
Very interesting points, actually. I totally agree that I think while structuring compensation in this post-COVID world and this really hybrid scenario, this sort of flux that I think we're all stuck in at the moment, right? I think it makes fair sense to really take a lot of legal advice to really judge what's fair to your employees and what's not. Because I think Nisha, I mean, so Bhagya, I think what you mentioned, which really struck out to me was that when you're in at home, right, it makes it's sort of a fairer idea to actually pay and vouch in for the rent, for the bills, a part of all of those things, solely because a person is actually compromising the sanctity of their home, which is meant
Yes.
for various different purposes, to
Yes.
do something that they don't ultimately own, right? It's not, I mean, something that they're doing until
Yes.
until the bounds of their employment, but it's something the company is going to own
Yes.
perpetually, right? And in exchange,
Yes.
right, taking completely moral stance, right? I might sound like a total leftist here, but then I think taking things with a pinch of salt, it makes sense to actually do that as well. Nisha, what are your thoughts? What do you think? How far do you think Indian companies could really be open to adopting such a culture, especially given that a lot of companies are going to are really following the Western model of starting up, of hiring, of even running their business for that matter, right? How do you think that'll stand in the Indian context?
I think it could possibly be very nuanced. Maybe some of the more progressive companies do understand this and they're willing to pay. In fact, when we were researching for the previous piece, we did see that startups, there are many startups that are actually willing to
Right.
pay their employees for, utility bills or even, let's say, furniture and things like that. And after a point, since somebody started, I think many other companies kind of followed. So and I think it was right from startups to corporates that followed it. My what I have been thinking of though is, like Bhagya mentioned, it is a knee jerk reaction because you wanted people at that time to still kind of work for you, despite the fact that they weren't with you at that point, and you wanted work to carry on just like it normally would in a situation that was difficult for everybody, right? We were
True.
all mentally displaced during this period. So in that situation, anything to kind of please people, is something that the company had to do. But in the future, when we're not really in a pandemic world, or let's say that, the intensity of the pandemic has reduced. In that case, how many companies are going to actually pay you for utilities or your home office? Because then it's your choice to not go back to office versus their choice of having you in office. So
Right.
I mean, I think the situation there is that you have taken that call to do it and not the company. So will compliance then shift towards the employee versus the employer is something that I keep thinking about. Bhagya, any thoughts there? Like, will
Yes.
these rules still hold?
Yes, there have been a couple of cases, especially in the US before pandemic, where where courts have ruled out that it was the choice of the staff member to work from home, and it was not something that the company forced them to do. In that kind of situation, all the onus would shift to the employer and not to the employee. So then if anything was to happen, any kind of workplace injury while working from home, or any kind of other sorts of compliances that would come into play, the employee will have to deal with that, and the liability will no longer be on the employer. I think there was one case,
So
it was ruled out by the Supreme Court of Minnesota, that said that the employee asked to work from home, the employer just granted it. But now, if anything was is to go wrong, it would be the liability or the problem of the employee and not the employer.
So it's essentially like a waiver form that
yeah,
people are
so
making them sign, is it?
So it is very interesting because a lot of companies did ask employees to just sign a document saying that, okay, we've given you everything, we've given you the money to buy the best of the furniture and hardware, and now anything that happens to you while working from home is not our problem. But that is also it's just a deterrence. It can be contested in the court of law, saying that just because you've just got somebody to sign a document, that doesn't mean that the liability is no longer yours. It could still be an employer's liability. So it's a very gray area. It would depend situations of the case, and the situations of the setting, how it happened. But definitely there would be a lot of liability that would fall on the shoulders of both the employee and the employer.
Got that. So, in a kind of a waning pandemic world, I still I don't call it post-pandemic because it's coming and going, but in a waning pandemic world, what is the fine print, Bhagya? What should employees know? And sometimes my biggest worry is I don't even know that I can actually stand up for this as my right. And when I hear you talk about cases and people actually contesting something, I didn't even know that you can contest that. That's how
Yes.
poorly informed I am. So what would you tell people in such a situation? I think it'll be great for both CHROs to know what should they tell employees about their rights, because I'm not sure how that happens in larger companies, and for employees to know about their rights.
Sure. So we need to understand that remote work is nothing else, but it's just a way of working. So even if you're working from home, we're still working. So all those labor laws, policies, and all sorts of rights that you had when you were working from the office would just translate into the same thing that you're working from home. Just the location has changed, nothing else. So if you had the right to be a part of a labor union, you could pretty much have the same right. You do have the same right when you're working from home. If you had the right of asking for leaves or maternity leaves, or even childcare allowances, daycare, creche allowances, you would continue to have the same when you're working from home. Nothing has changed in terms of law, just that your location has changed.
Right.
God,
That's all.
that's interesting,
But
and
then
we
to
have to
dial
keep
a step,
reminding ourselves of
yeah,
that.
but to dial a step back, actually, right?
Sorry. Yes.
But to actually dial a step back, the moment somebody thinks about standing up to something, the very first red flag is the office politics. How does one navigate that? How does one really pick up a
Yes.
conversation, right? In a way that, look, I'm not trying to attack you. I'm not trying to cause a fight. I'm trying to really have a conversation to see what's fair to both of us, right? So to make this experience that we're having this, much more joyous. Two, how can one afford a remote consultant, like an employee, let's say, earning a base package? What options does he have in front of him to really either become more aware or to probably approach someone like you, or any of those nuances? What would be, how would one basically come across, cross the chasm of all these emotional barriers in the first place?
Yeah, so I think, here the leadership and the corporate will have to play the leading role. So they'll have to understand that, if they have rolled out that policy for people to be able to work from home, they need to understand that their people would be doing the same kind of stuff, so that office politics could also pretty much be home office politics. The CHROs and all the leaders need to be very, very mindful of the fact that, somehow they don't create an environment of us versus them, office-based employees versus home-based employees, because that is where one's our spot where a lot of contentions would arise. And they also need to understand that, the person who is working from home perhaps would require greater duty of care, a greater, more attention than the ones in the office. Because, in the office, what happens is, like, you're pretty much in the physical proximity of each other. You could have these spontaneous conversations, but the ones who are working from home may not have that. So there has to be a more conscious effort of translating or transitioning all sorts of communication to a virtual environment where everybody could participate. Don't do meetings just, in the office setting, and where only the office people could do. Have all your meetings, everything moved to a virtual platform so that everybody could interact. You will have to pay more attention to those people, so that they don't feel left out. The moment they start feeling left out is the moment where your company culture, communication, collaboration would start withering away. And before you indeed even think of transitioning, you need to understand which employee indeed has the ability to work from home and who doesn't. Because it's a beautiful concept, working from home, no commute, you can pretty much work from your pajamas. But in the end, there have actually been no studies that have actually showed how working from home or remotely takes a toll on your social or your physical behavior. But then you'll have to assess each individual on their cognitive abilities to work from home, on their behaviors to work from home, also if they have the right safe environment to work from home. Sometimes it's just not conducive to work from home, despite the fact that that person has the ability to work from home. So the CHROs will have to first do the groundwork, and this is what All Remotely pretty much does. And All Remotely was founded on these principles because I defended a lot of clients last year on these very problems, and this is the reason why we brought this psychometric test. And then, and then decide if a certain individual can work from home or not. And of course, then it would go job wise, function wise, or whatever, department wise, whatever floats their boat. But definitely assess people if they can work from home or not.
This is a pretty interesting point that Bhagya actually brought. I think that we should all take a moment to really focus on, because we were discussing offline as well, right? Because every function, every role, everybody is paced differently. And I think that's the premise of theory of
Yes,
constraints, that the smartest person in the group always runs fast, while the slowest person always left behind. But as an organization, you always, the pace of the entire organization is equal to the pace of the weakest person that's in there. And you really need to focus on
exactly.
what you can do to really enable that person and make sure that he's at least up to a bare minimum average pace that determines the speed of the rest of the organization.
Exactly, because you know what happened last year? Everything was shut down. It was such an unusual year. Businesses weren't usual. A lot of companies lost their clients, but now businesses would be back to normal. Clients would return. So, just basing your decision on the fact that people just sailed through working remotely last year will not translate into this year, because certain people will have to be working in very, very structured, pressurized, fast-paced roles. Would they be able to work remotely under such pressure from home, or they would want to be in the office? Is something that now teams will have to judge before they go remote.
Right. So, considering all of the points that we've discussed in this and the last episode as well, one, there are two things, right, which come to mind in terms of what would be a right conclusion to this, right? One would be, what are the current challenges, mindset-wise, anyways? Again, I'll leave the floor to you. Challenges for the CHROs or any HR to essentially implement this, because let's face it, not everybody is a stranger to this. While they may
Yeah.
or may not have the entire depth of information, or everybody's stranger to these certain things. How do they again overcome the emotional barrier? How do they overcome their professional barriers or whatever it is, and really bring about this change that will really make them, help them bring a memorable impact across the organization? Two, what are the 5 or 6 takeaways, or the I think the steps that anybody listening to this podcast today, essentially, right, can follow and really bring about all the wonderful changes that you sort of mentioned across your case studies and other experiences?
Sure. So I would say that, a lot of companies we know wouldn't be going all remote. They would be adopting a hybrid model. So when you adopt a hybrid model, you'll have to act as if it's an all remote model. So everything will have to be virtual. And last year, a lot of companies had this heavy influx of digitization and automation. I pretty much sympathize with CHROs, because everybody was struggling last year, and CHROs was suddenly
Right.
given the reins of the company. Oh, just make this horse run in the field. And nobody really paid attention to the fact that even for CHROs, this thing was new. They had their personal struggles. And then professionally, the entire they were basically the chariot masters. They were growing the entire company out of the pandemic. And this is something that I want to congratulate all CHROs for. I mean, phenomenal job. But now going forward, you will have to understand that you may have certain senior employees who may not use very, very high technology or many tools. They perhaps will never understand or learn those tools. How do you
Right.
ensure that those people also fit into it? Because that could be discriminatory uh,
Right.
if a lot of tech stack is used that a lot of people don't understand. So
Yeah.
audit your communication collaboration tool stack. That's very important. Audit it to a level, and keep your tech stack to a bare minimum, the absolute essential. That not only it would save money, because you lose out a lot of money subscribing to different tools, but it also would make you understand if that indeed that tech stack is helping you or not. Second thing is audit the way how your team performs and the workflows. So adopt agile methodology, do shorter sprints as opposed to longer sprints, pivot anytime you see a blocker, pivot, be very, very agile, be very, very lean. Have these OKRs and KPI metrics set up for every role in a project based environment. So instead of giving one KPI for the entire year, uh, keep it quarter wise so that you know if that person is indeed able to perform, or if that metric is met or not. And if it's not, then you just pivot. And third thing is, you assess every individual on their psychometric abilities, on their behaviors, on their home environment. And also, if that, you need to understand that when you're working in a hybrid team, there's constant upskilling that needs to be done. So do invest in constant upskilling, because when people are looking for promotions, and then what happens is, like, pre-COVID, there was just managers, and now post-COVID, there would be a new style of management that would come up: hybrid team managers. And hybrid team managers would require constant upskilling. So there would be less of manager, there would be more of coach, there would be more of mentors, there would be more of guides, there would be more of people who are collaborating and communicating and just keeping everybody together. That's a new style of management. And what we have learned from this pandemic is that things would change now, and this would be the biggest transformation in how we work ever since the industrial revolution. And I know for a fact that the HR department will have to lead this transformation. So you know your team better than anybody else. Do adopt what works for your team. Don't just follow the herd. Every team is different, every team is unique, but you know your team better than anybody else. And feel free, and I'm very approachable. I generally, I'm very passionate about remote work. So if anybody has any questions, my LinkedIn is Bhagyashree Pancholy, or my company is allremotely.com. They can pretty much reach out to me there, and we can just take the conversation forward from there.
Right. I think Bhaga mentioned some really great insights here, especially I think on one thing I'd like to also congratulate the CHR from my side, is the fact that while everything, all professional things aside, running business as usual aside, what they had to deal with was the emotional barrier that COVID brought on all of us.
Yes.
How do we really look? CHROs, HRs, they're also humans, right? They also would have faced the same loneliness, the
Yes.
same missing of the work atmosphere and all these. But despite that, they bore the entire load of the entire company, figure out ways to keep them engaged throughout the thing by fun activities, by town halls, and all of this thing, right? So I think that's pretty commendable what they've done. I think an important thing that Bhagya mentioned we here was also the agility factor and the managers now becoming coaches, and your activities actually properly driving outcomes, but then purely based on, again, it's very contextual, as Bhagya mentioned too, right? Everybody's tech stack is different, everybody's variables are different, right? It's not the same constant equation that applies to all of us. And but I think the constant that we can derive out of this, all of the variables that we're surrounded with, is that managers can become coach, and they can modify their management styles
Yes.
to be more proactive and to be more conducive in a way that, look, you're here, I'm here to support you as much as I can, let's grow on this together. I think ultimately this comes down to that.
Exactly, exactly. So even now, when companies would be looking to hire, so now hiring would pick up. So now HCHROs will have to keep in mind to hire that kind of candidate who can perform well in an office setting, and who can also
Right,
maintain that productivity level when working from home. Because who knows, another pandemic would be looming in soon. And
right.
this would be. And now, whatever takeaways your team has from this year, do keep it as an emergency plan. Even if you do not roll out a complete hybrid or remote working policy for your team, and you go back to the office, but do keep remote work as an emergency plan, just because if something was to go wrong again, then you don't have to experience what you experienced in 2020. You can pretty much go back to 2021, all learned and adapted, and pretty much ready to roll again.
Right. Contingency is super important. Yeah. So, anyways, guys, this has been a pretty fantastic episode. Our very first episode. I think behind the scenes, Nisha, Bhagya, all of us know the kind of glitches and the kind of things that we had to go through to make this happen. But I think the support has been pretty fantastic from everybody so far who's rooted this. And also, big thanks to Bhagya to really come in
My
and
pleasure. I
agree
loved
to
it.
be our
No,
very
I
first guest.
loved it. I loved
Yeah.
it.
So what you can expect out of this podcast is, once this is out, we're also going to be sending you a playbook-based newsletter as well, where everything that Bhagya has mentioned, along with her contact details and everything, is going to be put in a proper form of a playbook that I think managers can really just refer to as a primer, flip a couple of pages, scroll through, and really find, look, this is what I need to do, this is what I should need to do, from an expert like Bhagya, who's really seen a lot of things that, some things that we didn't expect her to say in the podcast, like the person being stabbed. That was pretty scary for all of us, I think. And I think that's something to really account for as well, because this could happen to anyone, anywhere, right? So considering the edge cases, the wonderful edge cases that Bhagya has covered, to all the common nuances that could happen on a day-to-day basis, I think she's done a fantastic job
Thank
running us through
you.
what happens and what could potentially happen as well. So expect that in a newsletter as well, which you can subscribe to. Remember that it's going to be paid, so you'll have to probably go through the paywall and also get access to all of those things. But other than that, I think, yeah, we look forward to the second episode of The Edge as well, with a pretty interesting guest that we have in the lineup, which we'll be revealing very soon. And Bhagya, thanks again for being a part of us. Very
Thank
first
you.
episode,
I
yeah,
loved it.
yeah. Nisha, any concluding words?
No, thank you. I mean, I
Yeah,
think, Bhagya, you trusted us like companies trusted their employees during the pandemic, right? It was an edge case, literally. So
literally,
thank
it was
you
an
for
edge
that.
case. I mean, that's a pretty good line for us as well. It was an edge
Trust
case.
everybody.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, guys.
Okay.